Welcome to the ROI Puzzle. I'm Nicole Stirling from Stirling Marketing. On this show, I sit down with leaders in B2B tech to untangle the numbers behind great marketing. Today's episode is going to be a solo one though, because sometimes a conversation in a room full of peers surfaces things worth sharing much more broadly. Last week, I emceed a breakfast with 60 plus B2B senior marketers located in Sydney. There were no slides, there was no vendor pitches. It was just 4 panelists having a genuinely honest conversation. Now, the 4 guests that I was lucky to be alongside, Emma McCormack is head of marketing for Google Cloud Security and the Google Workspace across Australia and New Zealand. I was joined by Renee Byatt, who's the Australia-New Zealand Senior Marketing Manager at Dynatrace. They're selling into enterprise IT and navigating buying journeys and buying groups that span the CIO, CFO, and procurement. Geordie Sunderland is the Director of Integrated Marketing at Schneider Electric, coordinating across the Pacific Zone with one of the most complex stakeholder environments that you'll ever find. And then Alex Fuller is the APAC Marketing Manager at Island. They're a startup enterprise browser that's 9 months in the APAC region, and she brings a career across VMware and Hitachi and has a sharp perspective on what it takes to bring a new brand to market with a very lean team. Now, for those of you just joining the ROI Puzzle, at Stirling Marketing, we help B2B tech companies generate over $7 million in pipeline in 12 months by building demand gen engines that convert conversations into sales opportunities. If you want to scale revenue in Asia Pacific and Japan and beyond, then stay tuned. But if you'd like us to map out your fastest path to pipeline in a complimentary 60-minute session, search for stirlingmarketing.net/roadmap. So let's get into the podcast today. Now, let's start with AI. The panel, of course, started with AI. There were 56 mentions of AI during the panel discussion in a 90-minute span. So I think it's a really important topic that we touch on. Now, what struck me, though, was the absence of fear in the room. The people with the most experience were the least worried about AI taking their jobs. And when I say most experience, it's not most experience with AI. It's most experience as a marketer. Now, Geordie Sunderland from Schneider said something that I keep coming back to. Her comment was, only a human can read the tea leaves of a conversation. AI cannot do that. And I think she's absolutely right. The nuance of what someone means versus what they say, the reading of a room, the instinct that tells you a deal is moving even when the data doesn't show it yet, that's not something that a tool can replicate, or at least not in June 2026. But nobody was dismissing AI either. The conversation was much more practical than that. So Emma talked about using AI to go from what used to take an offshore activation team 3 to 4 days down to half an hour. Now, that wasn't a conversation about replacing a person. That was a conversation about giving a person their week back. So consider yourself a marketer. What would you do differently if you had an entire week where you're not doing admin, spreadsheets, sending emails, sending Slack messages, drafting, the time it takes to draft those bits and pieces, or even the time it took to analyze? Now that AI can do it for you, you as a marketer can spend your time really differently, helping to grow your business. Now, I also want to share a real example from our own work at Stirling Marketing. We touched on this during the panel discussion. We used Claude to recover $500K USD in pipeline that had been wrongly attributed to sales. So I have an amazing sales rep for one of our clients. He goes into conferences, he books meetings at every event that he's attending. He had 8 meetings at one conference, 5 at another. Really amazing numbers. But marketing was sponsoring every single one of these events. And when he was booking these meetings, he's literally opening his calendar up, opening the calendar of the person he's speaking to, finding time, booking the calendar appointment, sending them the calendar invite to their email. And the system was picking up on those meetings, on that new email address, putting it into Salesforce, but not attributing it back to the event because it didn't understand that that's where he was at. So it looked like sales was, doing this astronomically amazing job, even though they were offsite at a sponsored marketing activity. So when you map the event attendance, the booth scans the attendee lists against the SQLs booked on the same day, the story obviously changes completely. The data was always there, it just hadn't been connected up properly. So that is something that we spent a little bit of time doing. That's the real AI conversation that's happening. It's not fear, it's very much about usefulness. And there was one final comment to wrap up that conversation, which is AI can help with tactical execution, but it should be freeing up time for what makes marketers different, not trying to replace our unique value. So I think that's one that's really worth sitting with for a moment, not trying to replace our unique value. Now, we obviously also touched on other areas. So the ABM conversation. Geordie said it out loud, what I think a lot of us privately believe, that you can spend an enormous amount of time and money on ABM and end up with the same results as just good account management. And honestly, the room agreed. ABM works, it absolutely works, but the conditions have to be right. The account needs to be large, fully qualified, and genuinely high value. Sales needs to be 150% aligned, so not just nodding in a meeting, but actually committed. And there needs to be a nominated person from every part of the business working on it consistently. And that's the part where it gets to be incredibly costly and time consuming. One of the examples that we had was using ABM for a major infrastructure project. So consider something like the 2032 Olympics. That was not the example, but consider that as the one to think about, with a very specific outcome and a clear ecosystem forming around it. That's when complexity earns its place, when you've got a defined project, a defined timeline, and everyone knows what winning looks like. Where it falls apart is where we pick a big logo that we want to win, like a, lick your finger moment and finger in the air, see where the wind's coming, and call it an ABM program. So that's not ABM. That's very expensive account management, and we can definitely be doing better. Now, another topic we talked about was on the MQL front and why the room has moved on. Emma framed it up in a way that I really like. So she talked about shifting from MQLs to what she called indicators of engagement. The question she asked was, if somebody downs a white paper, is that an MQL? Probably not. But if that same person downloads a white paper, someone from their organization attends an event, meets the team at a booth, a third person sits on a webinar, now you've got something. You've got multiple data points that together tell a story about what's happening inside that account. So she actually drew a parallel to how security analysts track indicators of compromise across a network. They're looking for patterns that individually seem small, but together signal something significant is happening. And that is a massive shift from how we've been treating MQLs. So stop looking for the one magic lead that converts. Start looking for the patterns of engagement that tell you an account is in motion. And critically, when you take that to sales, you're not handing over a name, you're handing over a story. So you're not just throwing an account name over the fence. You are actually saying, well, here is what has been going on with that particular account across multiple individuals, multiple teams, potentially, if that's your ICP, over the last 90 days. And that changes the conversation that you're having with that audience, but also with your sales rep, which leads us nicely into the next topic, which was around sales and marketing alignment. We couldn't not go there, right? It's super important. It's something that I can't believe I've been talking about for at least the last 15 years. I don't think we've all solved it because that's, it's very human and there's always personalities and politics in the room. But it is still vitally important if we are to be growing the businesses we're working for, to be in alignment, in agreement, committed to each other. So Renee said something that landed hard. Marketing isn't a service. Please don't hire people who think that from the very start, because culture starts at hiring. So if someone walks in the door believing that marketing exists to fulfill sales requests, that belief is almost impossible to shift once they're embedded. It shapes how they brief you, how they measure marketing, how they talk about marketing in the room when marketing is not present. And I think it's a really good point that Renee had about understanding what drives everyone else's behavior, not just sales. So what are engineers recognized for? What motivates customer success? What do partners actually need? When marketing understands how the whole business gets measured, that's when you stop being a service function and start being a genuine partner. And she backed it up with data. So mapping 1,000 interactions against a single opportunity. The people sales were calling on, there were another 10 people in that account engaging with marketing content the whole time, constantly. So even through the Christmas shutdown when sales have gone quiet, the marketing journey was still there the whole time. It's just not always visible. And then lastly, we have a lot of APAC marketers in the room. So talking about APAC is super important. Alex raised this one and it didn't get as much airtime as it probably deserved. But basically what works in Australia doesn't work in Japan. What works in the US doesn't necessarily work in Australia. And yet global sales leadership measures with a very singular lens. So if you are working Asia Pacific Japan or the Asia Pacific or Australia New Zealand marketing role inside a global organization, you've probably felt that. The cultural differences, the language differences, the relationship-led nature of markets like Japan, India, Philippines, Malaysia, Singapore even, China versus the more direct approach that works in Australia. And yet the KPIs, the playbooks, the campaign templates, they all come from head office. They're built for a market that looks nothing like our very unique market that we have over here. It's not a new problem, but it was really good to hear it said clearly in a room full of people who are navigating it every single day. Alex also made the point that her first hire as soon as she gets budget will be someone on the ground in Japan, because no AI tool, no global playbook, and no amount of translated content replaces a human who is actually part of the conversation. So I guess what's the through line across all of this? Well, the data to prove marketing's contribution already exists in most businesses. It's event attendance, it's booth scans, it's webinar drop-offs, it's content downloads, it's all there. The gap is not the data at the moment. It's connecting it into a story that leadership actually believes. And that's the ROI puzzle most of us are still solving. So the good news is the tools to solve it are definitely better than we've ever seen. There's a lot more of them out there though, so it's a bit of chaos to navigate. But the tools and the people are definitely better than they've ever been before. So that's a wrap on the ROI puzzle. If you're a B2B tech company struggling with leads that aren't converting to pipeline, grab your free pipeline acceleration roadmap at sterlingmarketing.net/roadmap. And I'll show you exactly where your funnel is broken and how to fix it fast. And if you want to share your own story on the show, head over to sterlingmarketing.net and apply under the Let's Chat section at the bottom of the website. This is Nicole Stirling, helping you solve the ROI puzzle one conversation at a time.